Thank you all so much for joining. Hello, hi, thank you all so much. Sorry for the delay in getting started. We had a little bit of technical difficulties in getting our speaker logged on to the meeting, but that has all been taken care of. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We can go ahead and get started. Okay, well, thank you again for all joining. As we all know, today we are here to talk about the health effects of lead, and it's the first part of our 5-part Living Safely with Lead webinar series. And so first, I'm going to give you all a quick introduction of who Clean Water Action is, what the Lead Hazard Awareness Program is, and then I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker, who is here to talk about the health effects of lead. And then we'll have some time for questions, and we can go over next steps. And then also just to introduce myself, my name's Mercedes, and I'm an environmental health organizer at Clean Water Action, which means that I get to run our lead hazard awareness program, which I'll tell you all a little bit more about here in a minute. So first, just to give a brief introduction of who Clean Water is, unless any of you are not familiar. So I always describe us as an environmental advocacy organization. I like to say we were founded with the original passing of the 1972 Clean Water Act, and we did that through door-to-door advocacy. And pretty much since then, we've done local, state, and federal environmental advocacy in a lot of different areas. And I would say in Pennsylvania, and fairly specifically, we are pretty focused on environmental justice. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of our current legislation, and then as well as the legislation piece, we also do community programs. So right now, like I said, we do local, state, and federal. These are just our statewide priorities. Right now, we're focused on lead-free schools in Pennsylvania. So right now, we're working on a bill that would replace old, potentially lead-containing drinking fountains with hydration stations that filter for lead. We have an environmental justice bill that we've been working on for years. And then we also are working on a bill to protect firefighters from PFAS that are in firefighting foam. And our environmental health intern, Grace Adams, should be putting the link to these different pieces of legislation in the chat if y'all want to take a further look at those. And then, like I mentioned before, we also do community programs. And so we're a part of the Resilient Communities Stormwater Initiative. And so that's a program that was started to address flooding and other stormwater issues by taking vacant land and turning it into green spaces in several underserved and under-resourced communities in Philadelphia. Next, we have a program called Rethink Disposable, which is where we reduce single-use plastics by helping local food service operators switch from single-use to reusable foodware. And then lastly, our lead hazard awareness program. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. And so that program was created with the mission of empowering residents to both identify and live safely with the existence of lead hazards in their homes and communities. And we address that in a few different ways. So first, we have 20-minute Living Safely with Lead presentations, which address what lead is, where you could find it in your home or in your neighborhood, and how to live safely with those lead hazards. Some of you on the call might be here because you saw one of those presentations and heard of these webinars, which thank you so much if you did. And if you haven't been at one of our 20-minute Living Safely with Lead presentations, these we can give at community meetings, neighborhood advisory group meetings, pretty much any space where people are gathering, we can come and present to you all. So if you are interested, it's basically a 20-minute condensed version of the webinar series that we're doing today. And so if you're interested in scheduling one, please reach out to me. And then next, we have several just Living Safely with Lead resources. So we have a few handouts, and right now we're currently working on a Living Safely with Lead material library that will have our few handouts as well as handouts from other organizations that we can share. And these I can either, provide you with the handouts, whether it's a PDF or physical versions, or if you are hosting a resource fair or anywhere that folks are tabling, we can come and table and give these resources to your residents. Next is our 5-part webinar series, of course. And then lastly, you will hear more about this in our 3rd session, which is going to be lead and soil and dust that Adrian Wood is going to give. But we are also working to address lead and soil by assisting the Center of Excellence in Environmental Toxicology at UPenn with their lead and soil map. If you aren't familiar with that, look it up or attend our third session and you will learn more about that. And then also just to give a little bit more information about our speaker today, I'm going to pass it over to her in just a minute, but today we're hearing from Dr. Marilyn Howarth. You can see on here that she has worn many different hats. Currently an occupational and environmental medicine physician and adjunct professor at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. She's also the Deputy Director of the Philadelphia Center of Children's Environmental Health and the Director of Community Engagement Corps at the Center of Excellence in Environmental Toxicology, both of these funded by the NIEHS. And yeah, so without further ado, I can go ahead and pass on to Dr. Howarth. Let me know if you're able to share your screen or if you are going to want me to share your slides for you.
Mercedes, it looks like you need to enable me to share my screen.
Okay, I tried to do that before we hopped on, but I don't know, but it looks like it didn't work. I'll quickly try to invite you to be a presenter, but if not, I do have your slides so I could share them as well.
Sure, either way that works is fine.
Okay, thank you so much.
Well, good morning, everyone. Or I guess it's afternoon now. It's good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I see that Mercedes has fixed that. So let me just see.
Perfect.
Am I sharing? I'm sharing?
Yep.
Okay,
looks great.
And so let me just put it in. There we go. All right. So I am kicking this webinar series off with a broad understanding, hopefully, of where lead is in our environment and how it affects us, because I think it's really important to know where lead shows up in the environment in order to develop strategies to protect ourselves from it. In the first place, what is lead? It's a heavy metal, a basic chemical element. It's on the periodic table, but it's also a poison. It has very serious effects on both children and adults, slowing mental and physical growth and causing really lots of illness because it really can affect almost every organ system in the body. The reason we have so much lead around is that it's naturally occurring. It is living in all of our rocks in our world in association with lots of other things that we might like to have, like other heavy metals, other metals, and just rock in general. And so it also has a very low melting point. As you can see on the image on the slide, you can melt lead on a hot plate in a pot, and it will become liquid and therefore able to be used very easily. And so it's a reason why we have been using lead in all cultures for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Unfortunately, it also has a sweet flavor. And so paint that is old and chipping can be experienced by a small child as something that they might crave simply because it tastes good. It's really easy to extract from the ground and making it very expensive. And the smelting process at one time was done all over our country. We don't do very much lead smelting anymore, but Philadelphia did have a lot of lead smelters at one time. And so in the environment around us, lead accumulates from a lot of sources. The deteriorated lead paint flakes off in our homes and also outside our homes, adding lead to the soil. We had lead in our gasoline for the better part of the last century, and that lead, it was heavy when it came out of the tailpipe, and those lead particles landed close to roadways that were in use throughout that time. And so that soil is enriched with lead. I mentioned the lead mining and smelting. We have a lot of remnants of that in Philadelphia and the area. We also have a number of industries that use lead that have contaminated the ground over time. I keep mentioning the soil, and the soil is an important contributor, and the lead in it does not change into anything else, and it doesn't really get washed away unless there's massive erosion. So the lead is in general where these contributors left it in the soil around our homes, our playgrounds, and our schools. But the single most important exposure is for almost everyone is through lead paint. That peeling lead paint, those chips, and also the dust that comes from homes built before 1978. And as you can see in the country, 87% of homes are likely to contain lead paint if they were built before 1940. And I will tell you that over 90% of Philadelphia housing has lead paint. So this is relevant to almost everyone in Philadelphia. So where is that lead in homes? It's in a lot of places. We mentioned, starting on the left of this image, we mentioned the soil outside. So if you have grass or pavers on soil, generally it's harder for children and others to become exposed to the lead, but bare soil can continue to be a contributor, an exposure source. Porches. We spend time on porches if we have them, and a lot of that time can put us in contact with those railings where there's lead dust and chipping paint. Any moving structures like doors or windows, anything that moves creates dust in the rooms. The walls themselves, if they are chipping, can be an exposure source. And we can track in the soil and the dust from our porches into our interiors on our shoes. So all of these contributing sources affect people inside homes. Looking in a little more detail at lead dust from windows and doors, in really old homes with really old windows can often have ropes or chains that help the mechanism of opening and closing windows. Every time you open and close a window, that rope or chain can rub against the frame and create lead dust on that windowsill that children love to put their hands on to hold themselves up. In particular, little children that are not very tall yet, just seeing out the window, are very happy standing at the window with their hands on the windowsill. Door jambs are also, if doors that are wood sometimes will warp, and those door jambs can see flaking of that wood paint, and that's another significant source in homes. And then when renovations are not done correctly, homes can be much more contaminated. These two images are the correct way renovations are done in homes. But I can tell you that fewer than 13% of contractors in Philadelphia are certified to know how. They've taken the certifying course given by the EPA to know how to safely do renovations in homes. So many of the renovations that are done in Philadelphia are not done by people who have had the training to do it well. And so how does lead get into us? Inhalation, we breathe the dust. Ingestion, we eat the paint chips, or we can lick our hands, put our hands in our mouths and ingest the dust. And then a little bit through skin absorption, although not that much. And thinking about the pathways kind of all at once, lead dust that is around in the air from industry or from car exhaust has previously affected us in the air. In our diet, we know that there are some foods that have been contaminated with lead, and that we can eat them. Drinking water, there'll be another whole talk on that, so I won't want to expand on that too much, but drinking water, that water that sits in pipes that are lead or have lead solder can be a source. And paint, dust indoors and soil outdoors. But what I want to say about this slide is that our bodies don't care how the lead gets in. It all adds up together to create the exposure. And so reducing any of these exposures is useful and good, even if we can't get to every single one of them. And so there are some things that people do that can actually make lead get into us more effectively. In other words, cause more damage. Scraping lead paint increases dust, and that dust that lands on the floor or the soil outside can contaminate the areas for both children and pets. I don't want people to think that pets are immune. Often people's homes or children get their lead tested after a veterinarian tells them that their dog or cat is lead poisoned. Melting lead, like in soldering or welding, increases lead fumes, and lead fumes are very easily taken in by the body, and actually the lead gets into our blood very easily through that mechanism. For people who have diets that are high in fat and low in minerals, that can actually hasten or increase lead absorption from the gastrointestinal tract. And of course, sanding lead painted surfaces decreases the particle size and increases the ability to have those particles absorbed into the lung. And what are the effects? We know we mostly talk about children, but there are effects for adults too, and we'll get to that in just a moment. For children, even the smallest amount of lead can increase the likelihood of delayed development, walking, talking, sitting up. It can lower attention span, reduce IQ scores, contribute to learning difficulties in lots of ways, leading to decreased educational performance. There can also be mood changes like irritability, aggressiveness, and violent behavior, and ADHD. It's unclear for adults whether it's worse to be exposed as a child or as an adult alone, but many people have been exposed at both times in their life. And we see dementia, high blood pressure, premature birth, anemia, and kidney damage, among other things, affecting adults who have had lead exposure at some point in their lives. And one of the reasons that there are so many neurologic, so many brain impacts is that the normal brain development involves the establishment of connections between neurons. So if you look at the image on the left, those are just a few neurons in the brain, the cells in the brain that talk to each other. And you look at the image on the right, that is how many connections you might see in a particular area. Many, many connections, and those connections are being formed before birth, early in infancy and childhood, and actually they do continue well into adulthood. And so neural connections are interfered with by lead. And as you might imagine, they can be interfered with for many parts of our life. And here's an example. Before birth, we have sensory pathways, vision and hearing being impaired with all the way through the first year of life. Language, if you are exposed to lead in the first year, that can be impaired. And other higher cognitive functions, the way we think, the way we make decisions, the way we put things together and learn how to do things, that higher cognitive function can be affected well into childhood and beyond. So it really does matter when people are exposed to lead as to what would be the largest effect in the brain development. And just looking at IQ, we see that for preschool blood leads of 20, 25, 30, you can lose 10, 12, 14 IQ points. And that's enough to move people out of the normal range into the impaired range. And when someone who is in the normal range is no longer able to take care of themselves, maybe no longer able to take care of a family, this has lifelong implications for their ability to be a functional person and their ability to take care of themselves, both financially and emotionally and physically. But it's not just neurons that are affected, all kinds of other things, including red blood cells. You can see the healthy red blood cells on the bottom of this slide, but up in the left, you see stippling, those little purple dots. That means that there is that blood cell is sick. It does not have the uniform distribution of the materials that cause allow a blood cell to do its function. Similarly, on the right, you see bumpiness to those red blood cells. They are also affected and not as don't operate as well. The effects increase as the blood lead level increases, all the way to we know even below 10, you can have a decreased IQ and other neurologic problems. But between 10 and 40, there can be effects on nerves and red blood cells. Over 40, we can see serious brain damage, kidney damage, and even death. And why are children more vulnerable? Well, because they eat things that aren't food. They pick things up off the ground, they putting them in their mouth, so they get a bigger exposure. They're more susceptible because they have an immature barrier at the blood-brain point. So everything that goes through the blood can pretty much get into the brain up to 6 years old. So that includes lead. The brain effects can happen at a lower blood level than adults because of those very rapid developmental changes that are happening in the brain at that time. And so they're more susceptible. And so the exposure between ages 2 and 6 leads to the greatest harm. And there are all kinds of other exposures that can impact children. Imported candy can contain lead in the candy and also in the packages. We just heard recently about how cinnamon and other spices can be contaminated with lead. And I will tell you that sometimes on purpose, because the spices are purchased by weight. And so some unscrupulous people will put lead, which is very heavy, in spices. Lead glazes in pottery that are not fired at high temperatures, so may be done in a home kiln in a developing country. Those are the kinds of pottery glazes that we worry about. And then people do things like make their own fishing lures. Remember, you can melt the lead in a hot plate and pour it into molds to make these fishing lures. The lead in drinking water contaminated by water sitting in lead service lines or in contact with lead solder. There are still reports of some toys coming into our country that have lead paint contamination. And anyone who works with stained glass, the lead in between the stained glass is often almost entirely lead. There are some imported remedies that may be found in various imported goods from different countries. We see Indian imported remedies and Central and South American imported remedies. And some of these are intended for childhood colic, but are actually up to 90% lead. So it is really a terrible risk, especially if it's used repeatedly. So who should get tested for lead? All children at 9 to 12 months, and all children again at 2 to 3 years. And I will, and there's a requirement, a legislation in Philadelphia that does require that. And I will just call your attention to these two pictures. The 1-year-old on the ground most of their times, crawling around, spending a lot of time on the floor. And the 2-year-old up and around with a much bigger range, able to go into various rooms, outside running around, and not being fully watched every second. And they have a much bigger range and can get them into things that they didn't get into when they were a year old. Unfortunately, in our country and in our state, most children who have exposure don't get tested. We're a little better at that, at testing in Philadelphia, but not good enough. And adults who work in occupations with lead should also be tested, as should all pregnant women who, in our region, because most of those pregnant women are living in homes that were built before 1978. Our understanding of the impacts of lead has grown over years. When I was a child in 1965, the CDC thought that the safe blood lead level was 60 micrograms per deciliter. Through the years, they've lowered that number, as seen on this slide, to now in 2021, since 2021, saying although 3.5 is the kind of reference level, there is no safe blood lead level. And even at 3.5, are we concerned that there may be an exposure that sometimes raises that blood lead level above the 3.5 and can cause more harm? So if there's any lead found, we need to tell parents about how to protect their children in the environment where they're being exposed. And regulation itself has really worked to reduce blood lead levels on a population basis. We've seen the ban on residential lead paint, the ban on lead in gasoline, the ban on lead in plumbing, in new plumbing. All of that has really lowered blood lead levels such that now most children are in good shape, but not all. In particular, in our eastern cities where we have a lot of peeling lead paint, we still have too many children, on the order of hundreds or thousands, depending on the size of the city, are still being lead poisoned. Moving now to at the end here to talk a little bit about occupational exposure. There are a number of occupations that still put people at risk. Scraping and burning of old lead paint, mining and smelting, battery manufacture and processing, radiator repair, soldering, welding, and cable sheathing, and any kind of ammunition cleanup. So when we look at these big bridges, every overpass and every big bridge in the country is still being painted and restored with lead paint. Scraping indoors or outdoors puts that person at risk for lead exposure. And radiator repair, many people will take their radiators that have sprung a leak to a family-owned or a local person in their neighborhood, and they will frequently fix it with a little molten lead, and it does a good job, and that radiator then doesn't have to be replaced. It can just be reused. But unfortunately, people that are doing that often don't know how to use the lead safely, and they're using it in their garage or in their yard and contaminating the environment for themselves and children. Obviously, if they're soldering, as shown in this picture, they're creating a lot of fumes for themselves. And then I show here a picture of a firing range, because anyone cleaning up spent ammunition is certainly exposed. I will stop right there and be happy to take any questions if there are any. I see Kristen Motley.
Hi, Dr. Howard. Thank you for this presentation. I wanted to ask about what the recommendations are or your thoughts on testing childbearing age people, especially noting the impact of lead and infant mortality and not waiting until they're pregnant, but testing when we know that they're of childbearing age.
Yeah. So in general, people who have extensive exposure to lead as a child and may have put it in their bones for storage, their lead levels probably are normal. So if you test a woman or anyone of childbearing age, they are likely to have a normal blood lead, even if they are at risk. I would say the one caveat to that is it's really important to ask what their work is, because if they're in any of the lead occupations, absolutely they should be tested and protected better at work if their lead level comes up elevated. The reason it's important to test women when they're pregnant is that the state of pregnancy mobilizes the lead that they have in their bones into their blood. And so I think they should be tested more than once. The biggest bone mobilization is in the second and third trimesters, when there's a lot of bone growth by the baby, and the baby gets all the bone. So it the hormones cause it to mobilize that bone from the mom, and so the lead is then released into the blood. So that's why I think it's most important to get during pregnancy, and then only if you have a suspicion that there's current exposure, pre-pregnancy. Ms. Danielle?
Oh, hello. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Hi, everyone. So I have a question about the spices and how the question is like on spices, are there any ways to figure out if it was packaged in a lead environment? Is it any indications that they have to put on the labels to let us be aware of what's in the spices?
No. So there's no current recommendation or requirement to have them be tested. They're tested intermittently by people who know it's an issue, like Consumer Reports and the USDA does sometimes, but they're not systematically checked. Any other questions? I'm happy to talk about lead in any other situations or contexts that I didn't get to cover. Monica?
Yes, thank you so much for providing this information. It's very useful. As parents, what can we do to support our kids that have high lead levels? The only indications I've received at the doctors is to up the iron intake and also to wash hands frequently, which is part of our lifestyle, both in iron-rich food and hand washing. So, is there anything else that we can do?
Yes. I think I saw Adrian Wood on the call. I'm going to ask Adrian to put the website for the Philadelphia Regional Center for Children's Environmental Health, because we have a lot of good resources on our site in the in the chat, if she would. Excuse me. And also Adrian, the page that has our lead from the seat, our lead in soil around Philadelphia, and our document about how to think about lead levels in soil. So while she's doing that, let me give you some other ideas. So I think people should leave their shoes at the door, because I think we do end up tracking more in. I do think that if you live in the city, or you live in any area outside the city where there has possibly been industry or near a highway, you should either have your soil tested for lead and maybe other things, or only use raised bed gardening for anything that you're going to eat. So in other words, make a bed that's higher, off the ground, and bring in fresh soil. The other thing is look at all of the doors in your home and see if you see any peeling paint. Because if you do, a very important maneuver would be to take that door down and take it outside, and with a proper respiratory protection, sand it down so it's no longer warping and rubbing, and repaint it with latex paint. The EPA website has some very good information about how to do renovations safely, and that would be one thing to do. Buying new windows, I know that's the most really expensive thing to do, but windows that are really old, that have either those chains or those ropes, if you can even just replace the window where the child spends the most time, that's a really good investment if you can do it. But obviously, it's better if you replace the ones in all the rooms that the children find themselves in. Wet mopping and wet dusting, in other words, don't do any sweeping in your house. Wet mopping and dusting will remove lead paint and lead dust. Wiping windowsills frequently with just water. Moving cribs away from windowsills and beds away from windowsills, so that there isn't a lot of intrusion into bedding. Those are the things that I can think of right now. And Mercedes just put something else really good in the another good resource in the chat.
Yeah, the resource I added in the chat is Clean Waters Living Safely with Lead tabloid on there. It's an overview of a lot of good information with what Dr. Howarth was saying with like the health effects of lead. And then it includes like sources of lead, ways to test for it, and then the 7 most simple things you can do today to reduce your exposure. So feel free to take a look at that. And then, yeah, if anyone else has questions, feel free to either like raise your hand on the webinar, or you can put your question in the chat if you don't want to like say it loud. But
And I just want to put a plug in for the next few webinars. I've heard them all before, and they're really good. And they each go into some detail about recommendations in their realm. So I think that in some ways that's why I wasn't very comprehensive about mine, because I know that they are they go into a lot more detail for each of the other areas.
yeah, so the next 4 Wednesdays, we're going to be doing at the same time, noon to 1 on Wednesdays, we're going to be doing 4 more webinars. And the next one is going to feature Nick Gayton from the Philadelphia Water Department. And that's going to be on lead in drinking water. So that's going to give both examples of different ways that lead can be in the drinking water, as well as like tips to, reduce exposure and do remediation. So yeah, stay tuned for that one as well. But also, while we're here, feel free to ask any other questions that you have. I'm gonna put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me as well if you think of any questions after this. Ahmed?
Hi everyone. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi everyone. Yeah, I have a quick question. So, I use a lot of South Asian spices, in my cooking. What's an easy way to get those tested? Because like a lot of the things I use aren't available with big US name brands.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, I can tell you that we can offer to test spices. What we can't do is sort of send them back to you. I think we probably we either could have you come in and bring them and test them and take them home, or if anyone wants to test. I think it's, the issue is really, even if you test the ones that you have, what about the next time you buy it? I mean, there's no assurance. It's not like there are good brands and bad brands necessarily. It's probably likely to be episodic. But if you have a large stock supply of particular ones, we'd be happy to test them for you. We have an XRF machine. And maybe I'll ask Adrienne Wood to put her contact information in the chat, and Adrienne is the one that you get in contact with if you'd like to have anything tested. Similarly with soil, if anyone would like to have the soil at their home tested, we can make that happen.
That sounds great. Thank you. I will drop off some Ziploc bags.
Thanks. Lotus? Lotus, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Hi there. Sorry about that. First of all, thank you so much for all this helpful information. I feel like I was lighting my notebook on fire trying to take all the notes. So I was wondering, is there a way that we're able to access this PowerPoint here today, or if we can, if you have like a website of reference that we can go to and kind of like review all this information if we want to in the future?
I'd be happy to make the PowerPoint available. I think, although all this information is probably on our website somewhere, it may not be as all in one place as the PowerPoint. So Mercedes, how would you recommend? You have the PowerPoint actually, so you can feel free to distribute it any way you'd like.
Okay, yeah. I can send out the PowerPoint as well as the recording of the presentation to all attendees after the presentation.
Thank you both so much.
Sure.
Of course. And then also, I don't know if you saw in the chat, but Hugo asked, what is the risk of lead in items like crafts, toys, utensils, pots, etc.? And what are the key ways to check for toxicity for construction materials coming from outside the US?
Well, the United States has manufacturing standards that that restrict lead for things that are going to be used for cooking, for children's toys. But it is not possible for all imported items to be tested. And so, for example, I was in Ghana a couple of months ago, and some of the pots that they use to hold water, to carry water from one place to another, they're a lead alloy. And same thing with their cooking pots, they're a lead alloy. So they may not know that, that's hazardous, and someone from Ghana might, bring one over because that's their pot. They really like it. They want to use it. So there are lots of examples where people bring things or import them, or have family bring them that may not be safe. And so I would again, I am not trying to be so U.S. centric as to say not buy imports, but there should be an extra level of comfort if something was made by a U.S. manufacturer, because they have, at least by law, a requirement to actually follow the U.S. law, and there should not be lead in children's items and things that will be used for consumption. I don't think I gave a very good answer to your question, because I don't think there is a good way to know for sure.
Any other questions at the moment? Okay, cool. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap up the session. I'll just do one last shout out for our next webinars coming up. And so, like I mentioned, the next one that we have is on lead in drinking water. The following Wednesday will be lead in soil and dust, followed by lead in renovation, repair, and paint. And then the last one, first Wednesday in August, will be tenants' rights and Philadelphia's lead abatement law. So if you got the link to this session, you should also have the link to all the other sessions, should be in the same email. And then my email is also in the chat if you have any other questions. But it looks like we have one more person raised their hand, Shawana. Sorry if I said your name wrong.
Yes, hi, Mercedes.
Hi.
When I came in, you were talking about resource and tabling. Could you tell me how I would get in contact with you? I have an event going on and would like for you guys to come out. Could you tell me how to get in touch with you for that, and what exactly would you bring to the resource table or tabling event?
Yeah, of course. So I did put my email in the chat. It's mforsyth@cleanwater.org. I can also leave my phone number. Feel free to text me, call me as well. I don't mind at all. So you can just get in contact with me through either email or phone, whichever works best for you. And then if we do go to a tabling event, typically I will bring resources similar to, I'll bring the Living Safely with a tabloid that I put the link to in the chat. I'll bring copies of those. And then we do have some pamphlets as well that are a little bit more specific to each topic, kind of like how the webinar is. And so I can bring some of those as well. And then typically we'll also get folks to put their name down for our newsletter so they can hear more about when we do events like this, webinars like this. And then usually at that event, like at tabling events, if anyone comes up to the table who's a part of like a neighborhood advisory group or anything like that, I always offer to them that we can give the 20-minute Living Safely with that presentation if they want to schedule that.
And Shawana, I just would want to say that if that may, Mercedes has a lot of good resources, but if you were interested in having the Philadelphia Regional Center for Children's Environmental Health and the CEAT, the Center of Excellence in Environmental Toxicology, both of those can right now be accessed through Adrienne Wood. Her email is also in the chat. It's the same email that said for contact for lead testing. So if you would like us to come too, we'd be happy to.
Okay, and would either of you guys have any resources like just geared towards educating children? I know a lot of it is a lot of technical for adults, but is there anything that you have that can like engage younger children around lead?
We have some curriculum on our at our website. That's also in the chat. The PRCCEH. That curriculum that's been developed for children in elementary and middle school.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. And then let us know if there are any other questions. Appreciate you all asking questions. Okay, great. Well, that's pretty much all we have for you all today. Appreciate you all coming to the webinar. And like I said before, I will send out the presentation as well as the recording of this call after the meeting. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. And then, yeah, me and Dr. Howard will stay on a couple minutes if you wanted to wait until the end to ask any question. But otherwise, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next Wednesday at noon for the next webinar session.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.